from IFRC. A warm welcome to everyone. And this is really a particularly exciting session that we've got coming up because we're here to preview something that is entirely new. And we're not really asking for input from anyone. It's really just a preview at the moment with further sessions to come in the coming weeks. And our IM colleagues, Hussein and Neil, will be able to update everyone on that in due course. I'd just like to make a few opening comments before I hand over to our colleagues to take you through the presentation this afternoon. Firstly, I think I would like to actually just congratulate everyone who has had a hand in the production of the severity classification, shelter severity classification tool up to this point in time. Just before everyone joined, we were discussing amongst ourselves, and really this piece of work has been ongoing for some time, at least since around 2018 in various forms. We've had a working group within the cluster. There's been some expert steering of that by both Neil from IFRC and more recently Hussein, Camilla and other colleagues as well, plus those that have preceded our current colleagues also. So I just wanted to thank and acknowledge all those that have had a hand in inputting into the tool. It's actually a wonderful piece of work, and it's really important. It's important that we started it at the time we did, and I think it's also important that development continued and enthusiasm was maintained in the years, throughout COVID to the present day. The really good thing about the shelter severity classification tool is that it satisfies gaps that we've had in terms of our methodology for many years of certain things that we didn't know that we needed to know. Primarily, what do we want to know about shelter severity at field level? What do we want to have expertise in? What should be our specific sphere of knowledge? What do we want to advocate for? What issues do we want to build the case for? So it has a really important basis of informing a range of advocacy approaches, programming approaches, communications, and really putting our cluster coordinators and our IMOs in the driving seat for a lot of issues. It also, when we think about things that are really emerging in the last year or two, it links a lot to key initiatives that the cluster and our partners have been working on around the wider impacts of shelter. Like, why do shelter? What is the long-term impact, the medium-term impact? So providing the databases for a lot of these issues is really, really important and should put us in a strong position from advocacy, donor engagement, and working across and with clusters to get a better collective outcome. Another thought really is that it's a timely enhancement that supports the new strategy. As many of you know, we're working on the development of the new strategy at the moment to be launched this year, and this is a really critical piece as part of that to provide a sound data basis to informing our actions as we go forward, and certainly helping to strengthen what will be the new strategy as well. Lastly, I think in a world of big data and rapidly expanding AI capabilities, it's important that we're on the front foot as well in developing rich data sets. And I think that the severity classification really puts us in a good position for that. I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved in the extensive testing, discussion, development, thinking, and also making sure that there's been an openness in the process to revising where we are. We haven't been afraid to take one step back before we take a few steps forward. And that's a very brave thing to make sure that the work that's done on the tool also links to contemporary manifestations of GIAF and other kinds of intersectoral, intercluster, and multidisciplinary data analysis that's going on at the same time. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Neil and to Hussein, and thank you very much to you both. Also, Camilla and the colleagues online who'll take you through the presentation. We've got a half an hour or so, maybe a little longer, for the entire session. We'll have time at the end for question and answer. So we really encourage everyone to listen to what's being presented and feel free to ask questions. And we really want some good interaction at the end. So thank you to you both, and over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about expanding upon some of the background that Brett was just talking about, and do a little bit of an overview of the I guess the intent and the objectives of what this tool is attempting to solve in a very sort of complex set of circumstances, and what it's trying to achieve. Then my colleagues are going to help lead us through how the methodology works, what are the pieces that are part of that methodology, and then we'll look at how that will describe what shelter needs are, and then we'll go through where this is going to go, what the future of this tool is going to look like over time. So, one thing I'd like to sort of highlight, Brett alluded to it, which was that there's been a lot of fingers in this over the years. This is quite a long history. Brett mentioned the year 2018. I suppose in some ways it probably started even before that, in terms of how many people in the shelter sector had been discussing these problems of how every cluster had a different way of strategizing its approach, and that there was not necessarily a consistency between clusters on how different attributes of shelter needs were described or defined, and how we were approaching it. So we've had many discussions on how to systematize it, how to bring it all together and bring some conformity into our processes, both within how we manage clusters, but also as a sector, how we think about shelter. So, another sort of turning point with this was the latest revision of Sphere, and we brought some of that thinking into the development of Sphere, and you'll see pieces of the new version of Sphere in this framework as well. So this project has been a lot about tying lots of thinking together and making sure that there was coherence amongst lots of different initiatives. This one, though, is what we're going to be talking about here is fundamentally about the definition of how the shelter sector describes what the order of magnitude of the people of need are in a response, and also describing the severity of that need, because not every person, not every family, not every area or community has the same qualities of need, and then our interventions need to match against a complex set of variables of what those needs are. So this tool is again, it's trying to describe what can be very complex in a very simple way. So again, it's the point of it is to also help us operationally target where do we want to provide certain types of assistance and which priority, and give us a framework that we can see whether there would be change to that severity, partially due to what our interventions are. Go to the milestones. This is actually a simplified version of the milestones, which started many years ago, and the vulnerability classification working group was vital in validating some of the thinking behind this. But also, what's not shown in this is, in parallel, there is the GIAF, the Joint Intersectoral Analysis Framework methodology, which was working in parallel with this. So we're very intent on making sure that our systems that we work on within the shelter sector is compatible with the intersectoral thinking as well. So there's been a lot of back and forth with the GIAF framework and what we've been doing in this. So there's an attempt to systematize that way. I think I'll stop there and we'll go into the framework itself, and I'll hand over to Hussein. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, here we'll just present a little bit of the structure of this framework, and as you can see, it's I mean, we have the three colors here: the blue, the reddish, and then the gray color on the top, and is divided into these three main components. With the blue part, we really focus on the root causes, the shocks, the events, the current situation, the context itself, and more or less this part is common in many of the analytical frameworks that are coming in the humanitarian context, starting with GIAF, in IPC, in WASH cluster severity classification, and so on. So more or less, we try to keep it in the same line on that in that regard. One thing to recognize here is that we look at the vulnerabilities, capacities, resilience from two perspectives. One is at the household level, and the other one is the community level, and we try to differentiate between both in our analysis. Same for other humanitarian needs and conditions. We look at them from both sides, household and community level. Shocks and events are the with the others are contributing factors that leads to the shelter needs in general. The shelter needs, we have seen them from a people-centric point of view. We started with the language of the people and how people will describe their shelter situation. For that, we have identified three main dimensions. The first one is if we have a shelter, if we have a home to live in. The second one, how we practice our domestic life, daily life inside the shelter. And the third one is how we practice our life outside the shelter, how we communicate, how we have our access to our surrounding in terms of settlement, in terms of infrastructure, and so on. That's why we will see that the shelter component will be translated into a technical language, the shelter itself, the dwelling, the inside the shelter to living conditions, and outside shelter is to the settlement approach. Next slide. We have adopted the same severity classification phases, the 5 phases that are adopted in the humanitarian community to be aligned more or less with the GIAF, the intersectoral analysis framework. We see it from minimal, none or minimal, to catastrophic. We have a unified distribution of these severity phases, like 20% each one, normal distribution. From the minimal, as said, where no shelter issues, people are able to practice their domestic life with fair good access to infrastructure and services surrounding to their shelter. Moving towards the catastrophic, where people have no shelter or living in a catastrophic damaged shelter, life-threatening shelter, for instance, unable to perform their core domestic functions or have no access to services and infrastructure around them. The definition of all of these phases are in line with sphere standards somehow on how we adopt them, and at the same time they are translated into the methodology that will allow us to calculate or to estimate the severity at household level and at area level, and so on, to calculate the PIN figures. Next slide. So here are the 3 main pillars that I mentioned, and these are the keystone of this framework. So pillar 1, people have a dwelling, which is a structure where people can live inside and protect them from external threats and give them their feeling of having a home. The second, and this is translated in the technical language into the shelter itself. The second pillar, where people are able to properly live in their dwelling, and this is translated into the living conditions. The third pillar is if they have appropriate access to the community and common services infrastructure surrounding their dwelling or their shelter, and this is translated to the settlement itself. So, I mean, having these three dimensions will give us the a 360 overview on the shelter situation in general that the people are facing or the people are living within. It's not having the shelter without having a settlement around. It's not having an NFI kit without being able to have access to other services. It's all together in the same way, and this contribute to the overall vision of how we see the sheltering concept, where people are able to live in dignity and security in adequate dwellings with access to basic community level services and infrastructure. Mainly definitions are reference to sphere standards and the standards that adopted by shelter cluster over the years. Next slide. Starting from these three pillars, we have adopted a calculation model to estimate the severity at household level, and from severity at household level, we calculate the PIN. So people in need will be the people who are facing severities or living in severities 3, 4, and 5. This will allow us as well to calculate the area level severity, and from there we will have the full analysis of the shelter analysis. The questionnaire was developed with REACH to inform the MSNA exercise for the next rollout of the HPC cycle. We have minimum requirements. We try to have minimum data collection to inform this methodology. In cases where we don't have MSNA, we have informed cluster teams in the countries what are the minimum requirement of the data, how to use the templates, and so on. And this will be further detailed in training sessions with the teams to use the tools. Basically, the current tools are household level based. So it starts with household level data calculation on the severity, which generates the PIN, and from there we have the area level severity and the full analysis of the shelter situation. The key features of the calculation models can be summarized in a few points. The analysis grid, which translates the three pillars into main indicators and sub-indicators with kind of not thresholds, but with kind of analysis of each indicator and how to build it into a decision tree that will contribute to the estimation of the severity. The decision tree is based on the definition of severity phases. So we have translated that into severity 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and for each pillar we have one severity score, and then they are combined together to have the final severity score at the household level, and so on at the area level, and calculate the PIN. Next slide. The ultimate result of the SSC analysis is to get into shelter needs overview, including this will be a comprehensive product. Will include the household level severity, area level severity, the PIN figures, evidence list that is adopted with and from any secondary data analysis, any intersectoral exercise, including GIAF, from protection analysis, and so on in the country, to have this full overview of the if we remember the blue part on the grounding factors of the situation or the crisis itself, and that product, I mean, these elements will be summarized in the shelter needs overview narrative product that will be used to for advocacy, for funding, will be used to inform the shelter cluster strategy, will inform the GF analysis at the sectoral and intersectoral level, and will use as well from the GF the intersectoral analysis. It will inform as well the HNO HRP, the sectoral and intersectoral chapters. So this product will be the main tool of the shelter cluster in the countries to inform all of these exercises moving forward. Next slide, please. This is the GF framework. We have borrowed this chart from GF draft document that is under development now, just to show where the SSC sits. As you can see on the top part, we have the analysis flow, where we have the contributing factors and scope, where we have the context, shocks, impact, etc., which is an analysis done in from intersectoral perspective. And for shelter cluster, we are not requiring to repeat that exercise. We are borrowing this box from the intersectoral perspective and using it with from shelter or using shelter lenses. Then the SSC will continue to be implementing the shelter tools here to estimate the severity and the pin figures for shelter cluster, and will as well contribute to the overlap linkages and the key issues, which is the intersectoral analysis done by GF. So we are using and contributing to the GF analysis that's happening at the intersectoral level. That's why it's important when we implement the SSC in the countries to have more or less aligned timeline or aligned agenda with the GF implementation and the intersectoral implementation. Next slide, please. Neil, if you would like to summarize what is the SSC and what is not, please.
Yeah. So I think what we've attempted to show you now is probably complicated to digest. There's a lot of detail in this, and probably a lot to really unpack in order to understand everything. But to try and summarize what we're trying to do here, we're trying to use this tool to describe the level of severity of shelter needs on an area basis. So if you have a number of different data sets according to these three different pillars, we can categorize our indicators against these three pillars. We get, through this methodology, we're attempting to be able to describe area by area which areas are more severe in needs of shelter interventions. The framework itself is these three pillars. That is the fixed part of this. Within that, the tool is intended to be extremely adaptable and allow for every country to be able to adapt a set of indicators according to those pillars that fits the needs of their particular situation. So that flexibility is sort of fundamental to the tool. So what it is to summarize the context for a particular country or response. What it is not trying to do is compare one country or one context to another, because of all that flexibility and adaptivity that is built within the tool, you can't compare one adaptation of the tool to another adaptation of the tool. So we want to sort of underscore this, that the tool isn't intended to compare the needs of Sudan versus Philippines, because the contexts are far too different. The way that the severity and PIN is calculated is going to be very different. And we're not intending for, let's say, donors to look at it and say, oh, the level of severity in this place is higher than this place, we should allocate all of our money to here. That is not what we're intending to do. So just wanted to be very clear on that. That's sort of that's the point of this slide. And
Right.
I think
Thanks.
now, yeah.
Thanks, Neil.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So maybe for the next steps, in the short term, we are aiming to roll out the SSC for the next HPC cycle. For that, we are planning for 3 in-depth technical sessions with the coordination teams in the countries, IMO1 coordinators. And the 3 sessions are planned for June, early June, mid-June, and the third one will be in person during the GSC coordination workshop. Then we will have this month and next month a series of bilateral sessions with the relevant key stakeholders to brief more in details on this methodology or framework and get their feedback as well. We will have the ongoing support throughout the SPC season until November, and that will allow us to learn from this first round of implementation, get the feedback more in detail from real experiences in the countries, get more detailed feedback from key stakeholders, and see how we can evolve this framework as a living set of tools, as a framework that really flexible and adaptable to the emerging shelter needs and how we understand them in the countries moving forward. That's all from my side. We're happy to answer any questions if are any reflections. Not able to see the chat now. I don't know if there are any questions in the chat.
The question about the recording being shared, and yes, we will post it on, I guess, a link on the website, right, Hussein?
Yes, we can. If you are able to put the link in the chat, Camila, please, to the website, and yeah, the recording will be there. The guidelines, we have developed the guidelines. The tool are all published on the website as well, that we can use them there. Any questions, any feedback? Please.
Hussein, this is Boris Aristin, and I can see a question in the chat from Pablo Medina. If you want, I can read it for you, if it's that okay?
Yes. Yeah. Does it always require primary data collection? Actually, this is a good question. The framework design itself, it doesn't require primary data collection or household level data collection. Why? I mean, I'm saying this while we recommend having household level data. I mean, it's important, it's more accurate, and it gives better overview. If we are not able to conduct primary data collection, or we don't have household level data, then we move to the second level of the data collection exercise, which is based on key informants. If we are not able, we move to direct observation by shelter practitioners. If not, we can move to secondary data analysis. But all of these exercises should inform the framework, or should inform the methodology as it's structured in the 3 pillars. So any type of data that we collect, or any type of available information that is there, should inform the 3 pillars. People have a shelter, the situation within the shelter, and the situation outside the shelter, and that will inform our analysis. For that, we have one set in the tool called the evidence list, and it references all the data sources that we have used to inform the analysis, starting from the primary data sets that we might have to any secondary data analysis that might be available in the country. Neil, if you would like to add to this as well.
The only other thing I would add is that it doesn't have to be an either-or situation. It could be a combination of secondary data as well as primary data sets as well. So the framework allows for a variety of sources.
how this could be linked to vulnerability assessment and prioritization, maybe. So the framework, I mean, Samira, if you would like to elaborate more on your question.
Yes, thank you for introducing and for this important presentation. And this is a very useful tool. And I do hear that there is a mix of tools could be employed, including statistical, visual, and participatory, including direct visibility or direct observation. So my question is about, we are doing as a UNHCR vulnerability assessment every 2 years. And there is a report, it's uploaded on our website. So how we can link, as maybe as you mentioned, as a secondary resources tool, how you can benefit from this vulnerability assessment to feed and to inform the strategy and the research to define the severity of the needs. Thank you, and over.
Thank you. Actually, as said, any data source would be useful for the analysis that we are conducting using the SSC. With the vulnerability assessment, if it is at household level, if it is at area level, it will inform and it will be used to triangulate the analysis that is done through the SSC. It depends on how, in which context we are implementing the SSC, what type of data sources that you are using for the vulnerability assessment. Is it primary data at household level, if it is at the area level, and how that data sources are shareable with the shelter cluster from the organizational data protection and data sharing agreements, because on the vulnerability assessment, I think there are some restrictions on the data sharing, but whatever data can be shared can be used in the SSC analysis under the 3 pillars. With vulnerability assessment, I mean, using the report itself, it can be used in the evidence list to inform the workshop analysis workshops that will be conducted by the shelter cluster at the end of the implementation of the SSC, preparing to produce the shelter needs overview.
There are a couple more questions in the chat, Hussein and Neil. One is that if there is a staffing plan for IMOs in terms of helping to roll out the SSC.
Thanks for the question, Phil. You and I have talked about this. This tool is intended to streamline the information management processes as much as possible. So it's actually intending to take some of that load off of information managers and make the system a little bit easier, and to make it a little bit more systematized and perhaps even automated. So thanks for recognizing the workload of information managers. I think that needs to be underscored, that there's a lot of work that these people do out there, and we want to make their lives easier, not harder. So it's a really important point, Phil, and this is also built with that in mind. As far as the staffing plan, that's an external thing, and we can let people in higher levels than I am to discuss how that gets implemented within the forthcoming shelter strategy for the cluster. Yeah, hopefully that attempts to answer your question, Phil. Hussein, you want to build on that at all?
Well, thank you so much. You covered pretty much very well. Yeah, we are aiming to automate most of the tools that we are building on the SSC, but I would say we didn't have the courage now to automate them until we have the first full rollout in the countries, to see the real feedback from all country teams and how the implementation is going, just not to invest 2 times in the development of the tools or automated tools. We have automated as much as we can for the time being, but moving forward, we are looking for much more automated and user-friendly tools that will really allow the analysis to be moving smoothly forward. Camila, your hand is up.
I just wanted to add also that the way we're doing it is that we're not necessarily trying to add any processes that don't already exist, but to improve those that are already done on a yearly basis, like the MSNA, for example. That's going to happen hopefully no matter what in any situation. And so what we did was to work with REACH to improve the MSNA questionnaire so that it collects information that allows to do the SSC analysis. Same for pain and severity calculations. This is something that IMOs will have to do no matter what. And so what we're trying to do is to make that process easier by providing a set methodology. So hopefully there's going to be a bit of training at the beginning, but then hopefully it's only about improving the processes that are already in place.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Camila. And I'm looking at the chat as well. I see as a question from Pablo on how this will be implemented as a snapshot or as a continuous process. Actually, this is a really great question, Pablo. Thank you for that. We are hoping now to implement it with the HPC season. And after the first implementation, we believe that the second round of the implementation will build upon the first one with light assessment, with light review of the how the situation has evolved in the country, and to be able to have a periodic snapshot or kind of a monitoring on the evolution of the shelter situation in one context, more or less to put it on the monitoring side rather than to have it on the assessment side for the technical people language now, and to have more continuous overview rather than to have a snapshot, which allow us to measure the impact that we put forward with our responses, and as well to measure the impact of the unmet needs where we can advocate for more fund, for more resource mobilization to meet those needs collectively with other clusters, because we believe that shelter needs are key, not only for shelter situation, but for other clusters as well, starting from health, protection, WASH, and the others.
And this is the golden key, right? We've been talking about this for a long time. How are we going to determine whether or not shelter interventions are having the impact that we're expecting? If the strategy is that we are attempting to reduce human vulnerability or shelter vulnerability, can we use this tool as a monitoring framework to describe to what degree we are reducing people's vulnerability? That's the key. So if this is a framework that we can do that measurement and how we describe that situation, yeah, it would have to be periodically monitored and like Pablo suggests, maybe even done in real time. Maybe we'll get there. But for the time being, as Hussein said, it's designed as a set of snapshots.
Yeah, another question to you, Neil, from Phil in the chat.
I have to read it.
Meanwhile, Caroline, please come forward.
Hi, thank you very much. This is a really interesting process exercise. Thanks for presenting. I'm just wondering if this process has been linked at all, or in any of the discussion you've had through the GIAF, has it been linked to the definition or how we are going to move forwards in terms of identifying targets and budgets? Because in the HPC process, we have our HNO first, and then we have our HRP, where we start defining how many people we are targeting based on the HNO. I know it's a different exercise, but I was just wondering if you have touched upon that at any point in time. especially that a lot of countries are moving towards activity-based HRPs, which will shift again the methodology on identifying these targets. Thank you, over.
Well, if I may take this question, actually, this whole process, I mean, with the SSC from our side and the intersectoral process with the GIAF is to have more accurate understanding of the needs, the humanitarian needs at the intersectoral level and in for shelter needs, humanitarian shelter needs, and how we can respond to them. The response design per se and how we target the people based on vulnerability, based on the available resources. We hope that we can target everyone with who is in need, and not to prioritize and leave people behind. But that, as you know, subject to available resources and available funding. And yeah, for sure, we need to build up on how we can find a prioritization and vulnerability assessment, as mentioned by our colleague from UNHCR, to find to do the targeting. This, for the time being, falls beyond the SSC itself as it's designed or as it produces in the products that we have from the SSC, but the SSC tools can be used for that by adding some indicators to measure the vulnerability and the priority of the response at area level or at household level. We have seen some of those indicators being used in some of the countries, including in DRC, where they included some protection vulnerabilities, for instance, to prioritize a shelter response. And so on. So that can be used, but it should be aligned with the SSC and build upon the outputs that we are producing from this framework. We can discuss more in details about how we can create a vulnerability assessment from a shelter perspective, but it will need to take into account as well other type of vulnerabilities from protection, health, and wash, and the other thing at the intersectoral level.
I recognize we're running low on time. Maybe I'll just add, I'll try and address Phil's points here. But Phil, I'm not quite sure I understand about what you're talking about with agency level versions not collated in. If you might want to tell me what that means, but I can say that the addition of other attributes around DRR or CAA can be integrated within the framework as a basis for perhaps the settlement component or the settlement pillar of the response. And the framework can be adapted for whatever indicators we want to measure in a particular context. So yes, those attributes could be integrated. I guess the lens that we're currently using is, I guess, the humanitarian life-saving part, I think, is the sort of first layer to this. But yes, it could be expanded to include all of that as well.
Yeah, indeed, and that is well recognized as well in the GIAF intersectoral analysis that we will be using within the grounding factors or contributing factors to the this framework as part of the analysis. Any other questions in the chat or okay, no. Yeah, I think we are coming to the end of the time. I don't see other questions in the chat. I don't see any hands up. So we can conclude here. Brett, if you would like just to close the session.
Sure, happy to do so. Thanks to you both, and thanks to all the colleagues online and for the questions. I think that it's opened up some more thinking around the linkages between what's been developed and maybe some potential areas for future development. I mean, I know that we have to kind of call maybe a stop to things at a certain point and just get it rolled out. and then get things working, revisit where we're at, see what additional elements can be added to it. So I think we've got some interesting points here that maybe the IM colleagues and the cluster support team can discuss. I think it's also really important to have agency partners, members of our donor community and others on board as well to give some thoughts through to this. I know that we'll brief ECHO, we'll brief BHA as well. Thanks, Boris and the other clusters, IM colleagues, for your thoughts as well. I know you've collaborated up to this point as well, and your inputs have been really, really important, and we're very thankful for that. So thanks to everyone. Neil and Hussein, I think that after these two with the colleagues as well, we'll maybe see if there's a half a dozen points for consideration and follow up after this. On the last slide, of course, as well, you presented that there'll be at least 2 more sessions prior to the annual Shelter Week, where maybe some of the colleagues online will be participating. So I have opportunity for engagement of the coordinators, the IMOs, both remotely, face-to-face, make sure they understand the full capacity of the tool, how it's used, and any kind of troubleshooting with that. So I hope we can get things rolled out really soon. And thanks everyone for the inputs and explanation. It's been a really great session, and congratulations to you both and the team. Much appreciated. Thanks, Camilla. I know you've had input within your cluster role, within the REACH role. The partnership with REACH Impact has been so valuable over the years to help develop this with their expertise and specialist knowledge as well. So thank you very much to those colleagues. Thanks to you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Ciao.
You.